There's a lot of good qualities that John Harbaugh would bring with him to the New York Giants and a few concerns. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens fills us in on what the Giants would be getting if they were to make that hire.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, now the #1 sports podcast network in America. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome our everydayer club members, our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, and everybody in between who supports the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on Locked On Giants. And today I reached out to Kevin Oestreicher, who is the host of Locked On Ravens, because I had some questions about John Harbaugh. What exactly would the New York Giants be getting? So we took a look at basically where it went wrong, Harbaugh's strengths, his weaknesses, the concerns, the positives, and we just weighed all that stuff. And Kevin gave some really, really deep analysis and insight into what the Giants might be getting if they do indeed close the deal with John Harbaugh. Now, before I get to that interview, as of Monday night, Harbaugh interviewed with the Atlanta Falcons, a team that I think could be the wild card here, a team that I think could possibly be the biggest challenger for John Harbaugh, given the fact that the Falcons have a little bit better personnel. They have a decent quarterback situation. They've got more cap money. Now, these are things, obviously, that the Giants can address. But if you're looking to kind of come in and hit the ground running and have a good chance of winning, plus they play in the NFC South, which is typically, not the strongest of divisions. These are all things that maybe you've got to keep in the back of your mind when it comes to, okay, where will John Harbaugh end? That being said, the Giants, they still have to set up a meeting with him. It'll probably be later in the week because they've got McCarthy on Monday night into Tuesday, and then I think they have a virtual interview with Lou Anarumo of the Colts on Tuesday as well. So my guess is the soonest they would get to John Harbaugh would probably be Wednesday into Thursday. Just my guess. I don't know the exact schedule. I'm just guessing here. But anyway, that being said, let's check in with Kevin Oestreicher about what the Giants would potentially be getting if they do indeed make the hire of John Harbaugh. And I am now joined by my colleague, Kevin Oestreicher. He is with Locked On Ravens. And I wonder what we have to talk about. Kevin, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Patricia. I know we're all here to talk about Patrick Ricard today, which is, of course, a very exciting topic. And of course, Pat's an awesome player. But yes, a lot going on in Baltimore right now. John Harbaugh, I know there's a lot of interested Giants fans that want to know more about him. So I'm here to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Who better than to call on you, right? All right. So, Kevin, I think we need to start with what exactly went wrong in Baltimore. I mean, this is a man who was fairly successful. I know of late there was a little bit of a rough patch for whatever the circumstances were, but where exactly did this go wrong for him?
Yeah, there's a lot that went into this, Patricia. And I think where you have to start, honestly, is a couple of years ago where, for the Ravens, they've had a lot of really good, solid opportunities to win a Super Bowl with John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson paired. 2019, they were 14-2. That was Lamar's first full season starting. 2023, they're one of the best teams in NFL history, particularly defensively. And then last season, they started slow, but really found their rhythm as the season went on and entered the playoffs as one of the hottest teams in the NFL. But all three of those seasons ended in pretty big disappointment. And in the first two of those 3 years, it did come down a lot of it to coaching, where the Ravens would abandon a historic run game. They would make weird decisions with personnel, and that continued to, I guess, haunt John Harbaugh and his staffs over the course of the Lamar and Harbaugh pairing. And with Lamar, they want to maximize this window. And, Ravens fans want them to maximize this window. It's not every day you get a Lamar Jackson in your building who, anytime he's starting, you have a chance to win a game. And anytime you're just starting quarterback during a season, you have a shot to compete for a Super Bowl. But the way that it went this season, where they obviously finish and don't make the postseason off of that missed Tyler Loop kick to end their year, it kind of just wrapped up a very abysmal season. It was the most abysmal season I've covered here in Baltimore. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that coming into the year, Patricia, I think a lot of people, including myself, are picking the Ravens as at least the Super Bowl representative in the AFC, if not winning the whole thing. And to have the year that they had already moved on from multiple coordinators and they had multiple iterations of this roster. So I think all the attention was on John Harbaugh. There was a clip of him before the season started going on the official team podcast, and he was talking a lot about the Super Bowl or bust aspirations. And in his words, he called those aspirations garbage and phony, which I think, rubbed a lot of the fan base the wrong way, because I think whenever you have a team like the Ravens have had and a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, your goal is to win a Super Bowl every single season. And every time you don't achieve that goal, it is a disappointment. There have been a lot of reports and rumors coming out nationally, locally about how this all went down with John Harbaugh. People saying he lost the locker room, other people saying he didn't, but you can just tell, even just from the outside looking in, that it just hasn't felt right these past couple of years for an organization that has largely been drama-free. There's been a lot of drama over the last couple of years, and I'm sure that was exhausting for everybody involved as well.
Kevin, there was a report, or I guess a rumor floating around, that the Ravens ownership and Harbaugh were at odds over his choices for offensive and defensive coordinator, that, Harbaugh backed them, but he didn't, the Ravens didn't get what they were, I guess, looking for out of those two coordinators. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's still a lot of reports on that all coming out. Another show that I work with actually interviewed Todd Monken, and, he said that his relationship with Lamar was great. He had a lot of praise for John Harbaugh, and it's interesting because out of the three coaches, John Harbaugh, Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator, and Zach Orr, the defensive coordinator, it felt like the way that this was going was that Harbaugh and Orr were going to return, and then Monken was not. At least those are the reports that were coming out as the season ended and on that Monday and Monday night. But apparently, like you kind of mentioned, there either was communication or not. Now there have been other reports that says that Harbaugh didn't even have a chance to meet with ownership before he was fired. Just so many different things have come out about this story. But it was an interesting report because over the course of the season, we had seen John Harbaugh throw Todd Monken under the bus a couple times during his press conferences. And so a lot of people were like, wait a second, like, now this is what's coming out after we had heard. And there were actually a couple of pieces that came out in local media about Todd Monken and how there was frustration with some of the players in him and some of the organization in him. And, Monken, I thought he was he's the second best offensive coordinator this team has ever had. He comes in after Greg Roman. He really opens up their offense, which is what they needed. But there were some inconsistencies there. No coach is perfect. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit with John Harbaugh and, part of what he brings to the table, both good and bad. But I do think John Harbaugh is a very loyal person. The Harbaugh family is a very loyal family. It feels like whenever you have an in with the Harbaugh, you'll always have a job in some way, shape, or form, which is what we've seen from both John and Jim over the course of their coaching careers. But I do think that sometimes they can be a little over loyal. And John, I think, is very set in his ways with what he wants to do. He, in this situation, and we kind of talked about this all throughout the course of the year on Locked On Ravens, is he was willing to go down with the ship, not making changes, doing things his way. And ultimately, I think it did cost him his job. So that report was, I think, another instance of where if that's true and that truly was the way it went down, and he wanted his guys back with maybe some minimal staff tweaks, and Steve Bisciotti, the owner, was like, no, we need to make some changes, and John Harbaugh was like, no, I really feel this, then it kind of is fitting for how his tenure ends. But again, there are so many different accounts and reports of how it all did go down. I think I'm still trying to sift through it all and try to figure out what is accurate, what is not, what maybe was twisted, and the whole 9 yards there.
Hey, Giant fans, if you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. So if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your posts to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of the Locked On Giants podcast get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. Hey, Giant fans, it's a new year, new systems, and this is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And you know what? There is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so that nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so that details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free and get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Kevin, you touched upon it a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper into the topic of what are the pros and cons of hiring a John Harbaugh, especially, in terms of the Giants, a big media market, obviously a little bigger than Baltimore, a young quarterback. I guess he's had experience with, as you mentioned, with Lamar Jackson and having him develop. But from your perspective, what are the pros and cons of his candidacy for the Giants head coaching job?
Yeah, well, John Harbaugh, and I know, Patricia, Giants fans do have experience with hiring a special teams guy as a head coach in the recent years with Joe Judge. I know that didn't go according to plan, but that's who John Harbaugh is. He's a special teams guy. Came into Baltimore as the special teams coordinator from Philly in 2008. And 18 years is a long time. So, I mean, part of it is he has been very consistent. I think that's John Harbaugh, consistent to a T. The regular season success was always there outside of a couple of seasons for Baltimore, with this year being one where it was just kind of not so great. But he's a guy that is more of a delegator than what we're seeing in the coaching cycles these days, which is these, bright young offensive minds, bright young defensive minds, guys who are going to play calls a head coach. That's not who John Harbaugh is. He's not going to call your offensive or defensive plays. He's done a very good job, or at least he did a very good job over the course of his Ravens tenure, of putting together staffs. Now, he wasn't perfect. I think a lot of people in Baltimore have acknowledged, myself included, that hiring Zach Orr was a mistake after, putting him in a situation where Zach Orr never called plays before. And this is a team trying to compete for a Super Bowl. I think it was a little rushed. But for the most part, there are a lot of assistant coaches that come in and work with John Harbaugh and worked with him in Baltimore, and that have turn that opportunity with success into coordinator positions, into head coaching positions. And I think that even though he's not the guy that's going to be, we're doing this at the end and we're going to call this play, he's more of a delegator. The staffs he's put together have, for the most part, been very good. So he knows what he's doing in that regard. I can't tell you, Patricia, how many times I'd gone on Locked On Ravens in the last 4, 5, 6 years and said, the Ravens lost this guy and lost that guy and lost this guy. Because I think a lot of people have their respect for Harbaugh and his evaluation of his staff. he's someone that over the course of his career in Baltimore really shaped who he wanted to be as a coach, but he didn't start off the way that he ended. I think the way that he ended was as a player's coach, someone that guys want to battle for, go to war for, sticks up for his guys, and is really like that player first coach. Now, there have been a lot of reports about, did he lose the locker room? Did he not? Was the message going stale? I think in every organization, Patricia, there are going to be people who like the coach and don't like the coach. I think that just is what it is. But Harbaugh turned himself into a coach. So a lot of people wanted to come to Baltimore to play for. We had multiple veterans speak and people talk to the local media here and said, one of the reasons I came here was because of Coach Harbaugh. This is a guy that I wanted to play for. Now, I think that early in his career, it was much more of a struggle to kind of get there. He came in, wanted to make a name for himself, and there have been a lot of reports over the years about how, that Ravens locker room in 2008 had a lot of strong personalities. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Terrell Suggs, and there were reports of mutiny in the locker room and, guys like not liking the way that he did things. But I thought that he evolved very nicely in Baltimore. He has his guys ready to play for the most part. It's definitely not perfect, but, for the most part before the last couple of years. And you saw a lot of that success that I think, Patricia, a lot of teams would do anything for to have the consistent regular season success that Baltimore did have. Now, on the negative side of things, and especially because this is what have you done for me lately league, I think that, a lot of people are kind of attaching themselves to that part. Look, Harbaugh over the course of his career had a lot of playoff success early. Joe Flacco and him went to the AFC Championship when they were both rookies in 2008. They won the Super Bowl in 2012, 2013. This is a guy who has experience, is very decorated as a head coach. But I think part of why it went so south in Baltimore was because of some of those decisions I talked about a little earlier, where there were weird personnel decisions. There were weird play calls. And I get that he's a delegator, offensive, defensive coordinator. They make those calls, but felt like at times John Harbaugh was operating as if he wasn't the head coach. And he can override that stuff. He has the final say, especially in week 16 against the Patriots. That was a must-win game for Baltimore. Derrick Henry was running wild on that New England defense. And the Ravens opt to not play him on the final two possessions in a game that they ended up losing largely because they just couldn't run the clock out and Derrick Henry was not on the field for those moments. Then after the game, John Harbaugh was saying, well, in hindsight, yeah, I would have loved to have that. And everyone's like, well, you're the head coach. You can do, they said there was rotations and all this type of stuff. I think also some of the fourth quarter decisions and the time management was off for a little bit. The challenge decisions have really never been good with John Harbaugh. He has had better success recently, but he'll challenge some weird things. And I think that, again, part of him going down with the ship, and I never want to pin it all on one person. The way that it went this year in Baltimore and the playoff losses, it's not all John Harbaugh's fault. I know it gets pinned that way for some people. And it's the same thing with Lamar. A lot of the Ravens playoff losses get pinned all on Lamar. It's not all on one person. John Harbaugh had a big part to play in it, and he's the head coach. Lamar obviously hasn't been up to his standard. But, John Harbaugh also didn't drop the 2-point conversion last year against the Bills or missed the field goal against the Steelers or fumble at the goal line in the championship game against the Chiefs. But it's about the fact that, the offense in the AFC Championship game, after having a historic run offense, only ran the ball 6 times with their running backs in that game and kind of got scared against the Chiefs. And that, to me, I think is where a lot of people kind of just grew tired of it, and where I don't think it's about Harbaugh being a bad coach. I think he's a good coach, but I just think sometimes, Patricia, it's just time. And that goes even for guys who have been in the league for 18 years with one team.
Yeah, 18 years is a long time for sure. Kevin, tell me about Harbaugh, what you know about Harbaugh's working relationship with GMs that the Ravens have had, or presidents. I'm not sure what they, if you had presidents or just GMs. I know Ozzie was there for a number of years. Eric DeCosta's there, I think, now. How did that dynamic work within Baltimore?
Yeah, well, the dynamic with the Ravens is a lot of these guys are homegrown talents. And, I know that Harbaugh came over from Philly, but, Eric DeCosta has been with the organization forever, who was their GM, Ozzie Newsome, who still has a role at the team, but you mentioned, he was the guy for many years there. It's a very close and tight-knit relationship, so much so to the point where John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta in Baltimore were actually neighbors. And that was something that, they did a lot of content around the fact that they were neighbors. And after the draft, when everybody was at home for the draft, they walked up to the fence and with each other and talked about the draft picks, and the content team filmed it. But, by all accounts, all these guys are very close in the front office. Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh developed a relationship and a friendship, and Costa and Harbaugh as well, so much so that The Athletic had a story both locally with, the local Baltimore reporter here from The Athletic, Jess Rebeck, and Diana Rossini, who's the national one, to the point where Eric DeCosta, when he was informing people in the organization of this decision, he was fighting back tears. That's how much that his relationship with Harbaugh meant to him. And that's kind of the thing where it felt like with all these reports that are coming out, like, I think there was a unified vision, but there's always going to be times, I'm sure, Patricia, where, there's a disagreement about, how things go, or maybe the coach really vouches for one thing. And then, that tight relationship, all right, we'll trust you on this one. Like, for example, the offensive line, they did nothing with their offensive line this offseason after having pretty clear weaknesses, I would say, there at the guard positions. And the Ravens really only brought in one rookie who had shoulder surgery in the offseason, Emory Jones, and neither Andrew Voorhees nor Daniel Falele, who won those jobs, earned them. And they just kind of handed them to him before training camp started. And not that Eric DeCosta, again, gave him a lot to work with, but, John didn't really want to make a change. And it's one of the things where if Baltimore did make a change, I think their season could have gone better. They didn't. But for Harbaugh and DeCosta, it is a very good working relationship. Now, I've seen the reports about, the fact that he might want more authority over the roster or, to work with his own GM candidate. I know Joe Shane in New York has apparently put on a full court press here and has been very like, yeah, all right, let's do this thing. But, I don't know how that dynamic would be. I just know that, there was such a relationship between these guys and the Ravens organization, and it's going to be different wherever he goes next. I mean, Harbaugh himself is not going to change, but, it's going to be the start of something new there, where John Harbaugh's never experienced being fired from a head coaching position and having to kind of navigate where he wants to go. Now, he's the top option, so he can kind of say, hey, I want to do this and I want to do that. But by all accounts, I mean, I didn't really hear, or people didn't report on a lot of any discontent with their relationship with John Harbaugh from that front office. I'm pretty sure everybody was pretty tight within that organization.
Hey, Giant fans, let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. That's where Gusto comes in, to take the stress out of payroll benefits and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassles or hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs from one monthly price, which means there's no surprise charges at the end of the month. Gusto's automated tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits save you hours every week. And knowing that you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's Gusto, GUSTO.com/LockedOnNFL. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL playoffs are here and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets that you like the most. Open your Profit Boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks and then apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game. Now, Kevin, I know, you didn't cover the Cowboys, obviously, but I'm going to ask you this question all the same. You look at John Harbaugh's record and you look at Mike McCarthy's record. Mike McCarthy, of course, a candidate for the Giants head coaching job. the records are nearly identical. So my question to you is, what do you think gives Harbaugh maybe an advantage over McCarthy?
I think for Harbaugh, it is kind of the reputation he's built up, and not that Mike McCarthy doesn't have one, obviously, but I think that for me, I do think it comes back to with Baltimore, it was a lot more about just the timing of everything as opposed to because we could sit here and wonder, Patricia, if Tyler Loop had made that kick and the Ravens advanced to the postseason and then they may be losing the wild card or divisional round, I still would have thought a change was necessary. But maybe the team says, hey, we really can run this back. And I think a lot of teams around the league are kind of saying with a John Harbaugh, well, look at the consistent success that he had in Baltimore and, McCarthy with Green Bay. And then, Dallas, it was weird there, obviously. But you're right. Like the records are practically identical. They're known for some of the same things. Harbaugh with his fourth quarter leads being blown, we'd have to do a 5-hour episode to go through all the fourth quarter leads John Harbaugh blew in Baltimore. But I think it's the fact that his reputation around the league right now is still sky high. And I think, McCarthy took the year off. He's still widely respected throughout the NFL. But I think that people probably view, and this is just a guess, but people probably view the way these Ravens seasons ended over the last couple of years. And I would assume some of these teams that are very interested can say, all right, well, they were right there. Like they were right there. And if they had won one more game, they were going to win it all. They were going to go on that final run and that final push. And the fact that there was so much consistent success, spanning multiple franchise quarterbacks, multiple historic defenses, I think to me is kind of just like the what have you done for me now lately thing for this season for John Harbaugh. Not a great argument, but I think they'll look at what the Ravens did in terms of, they started off really slow at 1-5, and then they routed off 5 straight wins, and then they got themselves back into contention. And that was the argument people were making in Baltimore about why the Ravens might think about sticking with John Harbaugh. But I think at this point with McCarthy having the year off and, Harbaugh having the Ravens in it every single season, and even still, this year wasn't great that way, but they were still in it till the last snap of the season to go to the postseason. I think that success and the reputation Harbaugh has around the league and the relationships he's built around the league. Yeah, not that McCarthy doesn't have those, but John Harbaugh, I'm pretty sure knows everybody and has had an experience with everybody. So I think to me, that's why a lot of teams would favor a John Harbaugh over a Mike McCarthy. And I think a lot of people in Baltimore, when that name is brought up, Mike McCarthy, could he replace John Harbaugh? Everyone's saying like, well, that's just John Harbaugh 2.0. I don't know why you'd want that guy to come in when there's change needed, but for a team that's looking for consistent success and I think a culture builder, John Harbaugh can be that guy.
Kevin, final question for you. Again, the New York market is a whole different animal from just about any other market outside of maybe LA, which I guess is kind of hard. But that being said, what's the one pitfall you feel that John Harbaugh, if he comes to the Giants, needs to avoid that maybe he was guilty of falling into down at Baltimore?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different things. And one thing that a lot of people appreciated with Todd Monken during his time in Baltimore was the fact that he was so honest and candid and open about everything that was going on. He would take accountability. He would say, look, we have to be better, but it starts with me. And you didn't hear a lot of that from John Harbaugh, especially later in his coaching tenure, where there were instances of him throwing guys under the bus and making weird comments about decisions certain players made. And, there were times, I'm not saying he never did it because he did, but I think people just wanted to hear and see more accountability from John Harbaugh. And again, like Baltimore is not the market that New York is. And again, a lot of those comments would be put even in far more scrutiny than they were in Baltimore. A lot of them didn't even make national headlines. I'm sure in New York they would based off of the market. So, part of it is like John is a very positive person overall where, he's very much like even over the course of this season, like the belief never wavered from him. Like he's very positive in that way. We heard a couple players even talk about that as well. But with that, I think people, when it's clearly not going right, there were frustrations about that positivity and just like, not almost like admitting to the issues that were going on. And, with the offensive line play being terrible all year and Harbaugh saying, man, like I thought they played really well in this game when they gave up like 7 sacks against Lamar and like Myles Garrett had 4 sacks in a game. And the message, look, he's a consistent guy. Like he is very consistent, but sometimes when it's clearly not going well, and you still have that mindset of like, oh, everything's great. We're going to bounce back. We're going to do the thing. I think that's good to an extent. Like it's a better mindset to be positive than negative and just say, yeah, we're bad. Our season's over. That's not the message you want from your head coach. But I think it's a level of accountability, not just from John Harbaugh, but holding the players accountable as well. Again, I don't know what goes on in those meetings. I'm not privy to that. But at the same time, there is a message that is being sent. And you kind of have to wonder, all right, if this is the message that's being sent publicly, how much of that message is also the one that's being sent privately in those meetings to the players and what's going on. So I just think for John Harbaugh, the next stop he goes, I have no problem with the positive mindset. Again, like I say this with the Ravens, where they can be too loyal at times, but I'd much rather have a loyal organization that's too loyal than a organization that's not, because you get into a lot more trouble when you're not loyal. So it's the same thing with positivity versus negativity. I'd much rather have a positive head coach, but I just think being, whether it's even keeled or level headed or whatever, the word I want to use there, I can't really think of it right now, but just being able to say, yeah, you know what, like we're going to have to figure out things, because there were also times where John Harbaugh said, yeah, we are going to look into this, like everything's on the table. And then they made no changes. So it's some of that where I think fans got frustrated. And I think whether it's New York or somewhere else, I think a little bit more accountability would go a long way for John Harbaugh, because I think he has almost everything else down. The positivity, the continued belief. But, when you turn on the tape, when you turn on the film, when you watch the games, there's stuff that you see on there that everybody can see. And when that's not being addressed by the guy who's in charge, I think that definitely caused some frustration with Baltimore and the fan base.
Kevin, really appreciate all the insight. Of course, as we record this, we have no idea when Harbaugh is supposed to be interviewing. I think it's going to be later this week. And who knows if he really wants the Giants and how that's going to work out. But still, we appreciate you coming on and giving us some insight. Be sure you check him out, Giant fans. Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens does a great job, as do all of our hosts. Hey, Giant fans, thank you so much for making the Locked On Giants podcast part of your day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. If you're a true diehard New York Giants fan, the Everyday or All Access tier is built for you. You'll get one-on-one text access with me, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, an opportunity to participate in our weekly lunch hour call just for members, and a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store, amongst other great perks. Head on over to LockedOnNYGiants.supercast.com to join the Everydayer program and unlock all access. You can also find a link in the show notes. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Again, special thanks to Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens. Thanks to you for tuning in. Make sure you keep it here all week long on the Locked On Giants podcast. We'll bring you up to date on the coach search, and hopefully, who knows, maybe we'll have this wrapped up by the end of the week, right? Fingers crossed. Otherwise, we'll just keep on cranking out episodes. I've got so much more content for you coming up over the next several weeks. So do stay tuned in. Till tomorrow, Giant fans, have a great one.